Welcome to the With You Rugby podcast, designed to give you an in-depth look at the United States Rugby Foundation, including our grant programs and recipients, fundraisers, events, and much more. Now let's get started.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the With You podcast by the U.S. Rugby Foundation. I'm John Hinken, President and CEO of the U.S. Rugby Foundation. And as we get closer to July, where we will have our Hall of Fame event, we really want to get to know our class of 2025 a little bit better. It's a big week in rugby in July. The Thursday will be the USA Rugby's 50th anniversary. The Friday, the 18th of July, the Hall of Fame event. And then Saturday, the 19th, the U.S. men will play England and the U.S. women will play Fiji. It's a fantastic doubleheader, a rare event here in the United States, but I personally love it. And I have with me Danita Knox, a class of 2025 member and inductee, and a well-deserved class of 2025 inductee. Welcome, Danita.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, John.
You got it. Hey, you've made a lot of great decisions over your rugby career, and again, I want to compliment you on this one being part of the class of 2025, because that whole rugby week I think is so special. As far as rugby here in the U.S., we're celebrating 50 years of USA Rugby, which has had its highs and lows, as you would. We're celebrating you and your classmates in the class of 2025, and then both men and women playing in one stadium in Washington, D.C. The eyes of American rugby around the world will be on you. How's that for a weekend for you?
I know it's like throwing a big party for my Hall of Fame induction. So it's everything rugby that weekend. It's going to be an awesome weekend for everybody involved.
Absolutely. And you're right. You know, the focal point will be the Hall of Fame. And then we've just got these other two little events just to prop you guys up.
Exactly.
That's the way I look at it. So you started down at Clemson. Is that where you found rugby? Were you an athlete in other sports beforehand? What about your youth?
I wasn't really an athlete beforehand. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York, so I was kind of a street rat, playing, handball against the wall in the neighborhood, and just basketball in the courts and PE sports. But really, where I lived and the environment, it was just go to school and get home safely and take care of my two little brothers, helping out my mom. So no, I didn't play sports before Clemson. And I finally got to Clemson University. I started playing intramural sports, flag football and all that. And so I was enjoying it, but I was like, wow, this is okay, but it's kind of boring. I wish we could tackle. And someone mentioned rugby, and they said, have you heard of rugby? Which I had not heard of rugby. And so they told me where rugby practice was. I went out and really never looked back. And so it's really the first team sport I played, and fell in love with it. And that was 81, 82, I guess.
Yeah.
In my early first couple semesters at Clemson.
Well, yeah, that's kind of fascinating that you really didn't play sports growing up and then found rugby and went. I mean, handball in New York is actually world class. that and stickball are probably they dominate.
But it didn't take a lot of extra tools to play those sports. You just need a ball on a wall. So
there you go. And was Clemson just it was an academic choice? I would imagine.
Yeah, I'm an engineer by trade, but so I picked Clemson. I was on academic scholarship, so that's how I ended up at Clemson. And at that time, I grew up in New York, but I was in high school in South Carolina. And so people that my mom knew at her company, I got a scholarship, and that's how I found my way to Clemson. And, if you know Clemson, it's a town that's built around the university.
Yeah.
So quite an experience there. Yeah.
Yeah, true college town there. Yeah, fantastic. So you play, you graduate, and you're thinking, I've got to continue this sport. When you got out of Clemson, did you follow a career path or a rugby path or a combo of both?
Well, it was a meandering path is what I'd say, because I played rugby at Clemson and I really enjoyed it. But back in those days, it was very unstructured. So although it was a college team, it was a mix of college players, grad students, local people in the area. So you played. And So the grad students that were coaching us kind of graduated, so we were almost folded as a team. So then I started playing rugby with other colleges around, University of South Carolina,
Oh,
University of
wow.
Georgia. So I became somewhat of a rugby gypsy. And so I would go play for anybody anywhere as long as they would help me with gas money or a couch. I played for all the teams in the South and played pickup rugby a lot during those years. And I didn't graduate from Clemson because I was so busy playing rugby and doing other stuff. But eventually I found my way to Atlanta where I finished school, but that's where I ran into the Atlanta Harlequins. But in those years in between, I took some time off to finish college, but I also
Yeah.
played rugby. And so that's where I met some of the people that are still friends and became Atlanta Harlequins too. So, but I played in tournaments, traveled with friends, anybody's couch, any position. That's kind of how I played rugby through the years.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and you are a true definition of a rugger.
Yeah,
If
yeah, it
you go
was.
back to it, and like you said, the sport is like that though. You could
Yeah,
go anywhere, and someone will have a couch, someone will have a meal, someone will have a jersey for you, and
yeah,
you can go play, and we've both got lifelong friends because of that, and that's a unique aspect of this sport that I truly love, and it's really what
yeah.
brings
And
me
I'd
to this
say
sport.
friends I met during those travels are people that I'm still friends with and that, ended up playing for and against and with each other or coaching together later on in life. But, it's been a journey with all those folks.
So back, we'll keep staying way back in the time machine here.
Yeah.
Is there anyone that really influenced you at Clemson that kind of brought you under their wing per se and said, "Hey, this is where we want to put you. This is what we need you to do, and let me help you."
Yeah, I'd like to say it was that structured. So back in those days, it was often player coach, so the oldest
Yeah,
player or a grad student or whatever, or boyfriend or husband of someone on the team. I was back in those days pretty small and fast, so I started at wing, and that's often where they put new players and just said,
yeah,
if you get the ball, go that way, and if someone comes towards you, try to tackle them. As you learn the game, and then through attrition, I ended up at scrum half pretty quickly, so I played there for a while. Mostly in the backs when I was traveling around doing my pickup rugby, because in those days I was still short, but about 112 pounds. So that's,
oh,
I would pick up with anybody and play in the back line with different folks. And then as my career went on and I got a little heavier and slower, I made my way to the forwards, starting at hooker and finished at prop. so,
so
so that,
you did the whole rainbow. You started out on the wing and ended up at
yeah.
prop. That is fantastic.
Yeah, I tell people I ate my way to the forward, so over a long time machine. But one of my first tournaments where I knew rugby was a thing is the St. Patty's Day tournament in Savannah.
Yeah,
So I was still at Clemson, and that was like the big thing to go to. And we went there, and it was like rugby mecca because there were so many teams, men, women, international, and that was just like, wow, yeah, this is the thing for me, right? And so that's really where I'd say I really got hooked, and that was the bug. And I knew I was going to be playing rugby, and I have well into my 40s. So
right, right. An extended career
yeah,
through multiple clubs here. So
yes,
tournaments, they've kind of gone the way of the dinosaur over the years, which is,
yeah,
I think, very sad. Some of my best memories and experiences were tournaments out here on the West Coast where I played.
okay, yeah,
Um, you mentioned the St. Patty's Day tournament in Savannah, which I know about, but I've never got out there.
right.
What was the best tournament and why that you guys played in? Did you win it, or was it just a fun experience, or the travel and stories that when you go on tour
Yeah,
sometimes
it's
stay
more
on?
it's the going on tour part, and so I'd say Ruggerfest, which was in Athens, Georgia,
Yeah,
University of Georgia. So that was a tournament that was in the winter months, but like a lot of the northeastern teams that were still in snow and stuff would come down, and so the weather in the south, especially in Georgia, that time of the year could be a sunny weekend in shorts, and so all the big teams back then, Midwest Farmers Daughters and all these cool team names that you knew of, so they all came down. It was just a big fun tournament, but party weekend. And in those days, it was about like the atmosphere and the after party and the singing and doing skits and stuff after the tournaments.
yeah,
But there was another Pumpkin Fest was in Philly area. So, Champagne Classic was on the West Coast, so it
Right.
became going to all these tournaments.
San
And in those
Diego.
days, yeah, and it wasn't so much um, all-star play at that point, and then as we played in tournaments and teams, then you started hearing about ITTs and all-star tournaments and stuff. But in the early days, it was just the joy of playing and running into people in the competition of those tournaments.
So with your playing career, were you selected to ITTs or any of those?
Yeah, I'd say I was an above average player, and I got to play with some, pretty special players along the way, and I'll mention some of those in a few. But yeah, I
Yeah,
played for the South All Stars.
there you go.
So ITTs was probably the highest I got in rugby playing career, but that's where, you saw the best of the best from around the country, and that was really in those days a selection vehicle for, the national teams and
Yeah.
selectors. So, men and women, and it was kind of bragging rights by territories in those days. So
Oh yeah.
South Panthers were it. So
Yeah, I remember those ITT days, and they were great. They were great tournaments, and again, friendships that you made with the other territorial
exactly.
teams.
Yep. Competition
Still,
and friendship, but yeah, that's where you ran into them mostly.
yeah, one was breeding the other. You
Yep.
always want to beat your buddy more than a
Exactly.
stranger that was
Exactly.
like that. Um, so yeah, rarely where you made your biggest impact and where you have been invaluable not only for U.S. rugby but really almost influential around the world was on the administrative organizational side. You've mentioned a few times that it wasn't as structured or it wasn't as this. You saw that and you kind of came in and solved a lot of those, or at least tried to solve a lot of those types of issues. So let's go back. You had admin roles. Why is it just because that you said, look, I see this and I want to fix it? Or did they say, Danita, you're the smartest person in the room. You need to fix it.
No, probably a little bit that I couldn't keep my mouth shut and always had ideas on. I'm an engineer by trade, so it's like how
Right.
can we fix this or make it better? And I've really never been the like let's whine and make excuses. If you see something that needs fixing, you've got to be, if you're going to complain or talk about it, you have to be willing to push your sleeves up and get in and do it.
Yeah.
So I try to support the things that I think are important to have happen, but not just by, adding your 2 cents. You got to do the work. So um, I have to keep my mouth shut to not be the leader of organizations that I'm in these days, but because I usually, I walk in and I have ideas about how to help or fix things. And so, even at Clemson, when the team was folding back in my college days, I ended up with the jersey. So I was then the most senior person. So I found myself falling into these admin roles with the Harlequins and other stuff. But I guess it's a natural tendency to want to fix and repair or help.
Yeah.
And so, I don't have a lot of patience for complaining if you won't do the work. And so I find myself over and over in administrative roles, but that's been my place where I've been able to contribute because I've got that kind of work ethic and
Yeah.
try to see around corners a little bit and help where help's needed. And so that's kind of been my gig
So,
throughout rugby over the years.
yeah. And it's been impressive. Talk us all the way back to those administrative roles and the accomplishments that came through. Obviously, that we'll get to the big ones, but they have to start with the small ones.
Sure, sure. So, like I said, I was kind of a rugby gypsy playing whatever, and then I got to the Harlequins and really was just interested in playing and having a solid fixture. But I ended up being president of the Harlequins for some time and multiple
Yeah,
stints as president of the Atlanta Harlequins. And I'm proud to say they're still a club that's around. But, um, you know, in that, it's like, how do we get better? How do we get sponsorship? How do we do whatever? And so Harlequins, and then from there, I ended up being president of the Georgia Rugby Union. So in those days, we had local area
yeah,
unions. And then
LEUs.
from there, I went on to the territory USA Rugby South. So I was on the USA Rugby South board. First women's director for many years. So I was involved with the under 23s, ITTs or All Star Championships, and helped form the under 19, the first under 19 All Star Championship here with Nancy Campbell and Bryn Chivers. There wasn't one, and so we just kept working our way down younger and younger. But establishing that, I had friends at that time on the national team and national team coaches that were friends and friends, teammates and opponents. But they were asking for help. So when the national team was on tour or trying to find places for camps, I organized a lot of that in the metro Atlanta area, finding housing, sponsorship dollars. So that's kind of how I started, working through the administrative stuff. And then from USA Rugby South, they nominated me to be on the USA Rugby board. Back in those days, there were 3 people from each territory that got to the USA Rugby board of directors. And so
Yeah.
that was a funny trip because I thought, wow, I'm here at USA Rugby. This is where it all happens. Honored, and I've always been the dress for the job you think you want and act like that. And so I got there, and it wasn't quite that. Uh, so there were 3 people from every territory. So there was probably 27, 30 people that were part of the board back then. So it was a lot of personalities and a lot
Yeah.
going on. But so I was part of that board for many years and tried to work through that. And that's where I met Ann Berry.
Right.
And so there weren't that many women on the board back then. So we would have little private get-together meetings in our office, which was a ladies' room. So we go in there and talk about what was happening, but people schooled me on how to be
Yeah.
prepared, how to do your homework, put the work in, and show up ready to vote on things and make decisions. And so I started, having people around me that could model the behavior you want. Barb Fugate was around. So I started seeing other people and other women especially that were doing good things and helping me understand how to carry myself in that environment. So I was on the USA Rugby board, and I was part of the board that voted ourselves out of a job,
Well
saying
done.
30 people, too much to get work done, and it should be run more professionally. And so that's when we decided to have an independent professional board of directors instead of 3 people from every territory. So I didn't leave USA Rugby then, but I was on the USA Rugby Congress, which was all those people that were on the board went to Congress. And so I was on Congress for, I don't know, maybe 10 years. And so during Doug Arnott's, Nigel Neville's tenure, and Bob Latham, a lot of other people. And so on the Congress, I was the chair of the TU-LAU committee at that time. We were still trying to figure out what was the right structure. The outcome of that exercise, which took about 3 years, was the GU structure for
Yeah.
club rugby. So I kind of led that committee, and we had some good people doing hard work. So that was kind of my stint through formal administrative positions. And then somewhere along in there, Kathy Flores was a national team coach, right? Who was a friend, an opponent, and all
A
that.
legend. And a
Yeah,
legend.
yeah. And so got a phone call one day and say, hey, we could use some help on fundraising. What do you guys think about an organization that's focused on women's rugby? And, so if you knew Kathy, it was like if she asked
Yeah.
a question, the answer was yes. So me and I think 6 other gals said yes. And that's how we started the U.S. Women's Rugby Foundation 20 years ago. And so that's, fast forward, we've done a lot of stuff there. But that's been, me talking fast and being a New Yorker, that I am the path of administration that I've had.
So yeah, and that's a one long sentence that we just went
Yes.
through.
Yeah, so it feels like it sometimes, but yeah,
Yeah.
dog ears. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. So I want to compare. You made some interesting comments, and I agree with you. I was on the USA Rugby Board starting in the 1900s, and then over the turn of the century, and compare how that was run to the foundation that you started with the women. Did you find that maybe a more focused foundation was more effective in that regard than maybe being on the big USA Rugby board where there's 1,000 things to do?
Yeah, I think that's a simplistic way to say it. But so I was on USA Rugby's board, and as I've said, I feel like you have to be in the room. You want a seat at the
Yeah.
table. You have to be representative. And so, I worked fine with the board, and I, took on projects, and I was on several committees and things like that. Did hard work, and I was willing to do the work, but I felt like, just between the politics and all the stuff going on, there was a lot of moving parts. And so the U.S. Women's Rugby Foundation has had a very narrow focus for 20 years, but it's
Yeah.
a place that we've been able to affect change and make a difference. And frankly, the U.S. Rugby Foundation, you guys have been around for 60 years plus
Yeah.
now. And so when we formed, it's like, okay, what are they doing? What's this group doing? And so being an engineer, I made a matrix and said, who's doing what? Let's pick a lane. There's plenty of work and help that needs to happen. And so, we've stayed in a very narrow focus where we could make changes. And, our only goal is to grow the women's game and stay there. And there's no other ulterior motive. And so we've been able to focus and drive and drive. And, we've grown. But yeah, I found like if I was going to put that kind of time and work in, then do it in a place that I could make a difference. And so that's where the U.S. Women's Rugby Foundation kind of came in. And so, that's what I've been up to. And so, we've had good working relationships with USA Rugby and with all the other organizations around us. But, it's a niche where we can, work hard and work long, and we have. And people trust us. We've had, credibility and integrity when people have doubted other organizations. And so we've been able just to do what we do. And, the community out there trusts us to do our thing. And so we've been able to do that. And we're proud of that work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And you're right. We've worked together and supported each other because, I think it's what we both have here is, the rising tide floats all boats here. Yep. Everybody, if everybody's going in the same direction, it's going to help everybody. And again, I applaud your focus, and you're the inner engineer, and you saying, look, this is where we need to work on, and I'm going to help get it done. And I've got my group of friends, and we're going to get this done, because it wasn't that long ago, as we've talked about, that there weren't these opportunities for under 21s, under 19s, under 20s, 18s,
right,
all the way down the list. And you've started that. So, is there a point in there? Are you proud of one thing more than the other? What would be the biggest accomplishment so far in the life of Danita Knox?
Yeah, I think where I've had the most impact, and with, like you said, a group of friends, because no one does it alone, is probably the Women's Rugby Foundation, just because it's gotten bigger and we have an annual conference and all these things. And so we've been able to affect change for more people, and so a larger group. And we talk about the Wayback Machine. There weren't all these other, I call them the alphabet organizations, that get confusing, but so now there are other organizations that are like, I can make a difference and I can do something. The XV Foundation, the Girls Rugby Inc. There's a lot of groups doing good stuff, and I think maybe modeling from us and others, but like you can pick a niche. There's so much that needs to be done to carry our sport forward in a country as large as the U.S. I think that's been the biggest part. But I think as an administrator, creating space for other people, for me, being an African American woman, being a model and a role model for people that look like me, saying you can, and you don't have to have any, great special talent. You have to be willing to do some work and, raise your hand and be a part of it, and don't complain, get involved, is kind of how I feel about it. And so setting the example, working as an administrator, and, it's not necessarily the sexiest thing or the biggest title, but it's so critical, and the administrators out there. And so I'd say that's my focus and passion, is like helping other administrators kind of network and use each other and understand that they can get better and it can be excellent, and you can be professional in that too, and maybe even get paid to do something that you've been doing for free and as a volunteer for many years. Because the great coaches that we've talked about, the great, other Hall of Famers out there, they have strong administrators. The teams, they have team managers, they have administrators, they have people behind them that are doing the behind the scenes heavy work that makes the coaches be able to coach, and the players, that are playing at the top level be able to go play. So I've been happy in that role, and it's paid off for me.
Oh, dividends. So there are obviously players in the class of 2025, and they often have someone that took them under the wing, and, this is how you do the game. From the administrative side, you've mentioned an Ann Barry. You've mentioned a Kathy Flores. Who would be your influence that guided you the most? Or, were you so new? You were such a trailblazer. I've used that word with Barb Fugate, that, hey, you made the influencer. You are the influencer.
And so Anne might be embarrassed that I say that she was someone that showed me the way. And so they're not always people that know that they're your models, but people model behavior that you want to mimic or that you don't. And so when you see people that are modeling the behavior you want, you kind of learn how to carry yourself and things about that. But yeah, Kathy's excellent was more about how can you take great athletes and average athletes and smush them together and always build excellence and excellent teams. So from playing against Kathy in the FSU days when we were all chasing, it was kind of the equivalent of the All Blacks in the rest of the world. FSU and Kathy's team as a player and opponent we were all chasing and trying to
Yeah.
figure out how to beat them. But then as a coach, many years later, the Atlanta Harlequins played against Berkeley, and all the players weren't superstars and Eagles, but certainly she built championship teams. So like there was some secret sauce in there on
Yeah.
how do you take people and motivate them in a way to play their best and, be the best they can be and still get excellence and championship teams out of that. I'd say the person that probably was the eye-opening, changing the way I thought about the game and administration was my coach, an Argentinian coach named Carlos Carbini. The Harlequins had always been sort of player coach and a series of people coming through the doors as coaches, from the local men's teams and whatever. But Carlos, coming from Argentina, started to explain what team versus club and how you build a club and a legacy and how you could have competition. So this was before, we had Women's Premier League, before we had professional women's rugby. We did have a national team, that built themselves back in the
Yes.
91 team.
Yes.
But starting to envision there could be player pathways and how you could build something for excellence and building on the national stage. And so we had so many talks, and he's coming to the Hall of Fame, so I'm so proud of that. But
Yay.
I'm just starting to understand that there could be something different than just putting your boots on and showing up to play, but having a vision on where you want to be in 3-5 years and how you start to develop pathways of administrators and players and opening doors so that you have this pyramid of excellent people coming through the programs. And then, like my club, the Harlequins, is 30 plus years old, but just starting to see that from another country's perspective where they take it for granted that it's a rugby from youth all the way up to club side,
Yeah.
and then on to international and representative rugby. So if I had to say one person helped me see rugby in a different way, it was the Argentinian way. And that's where I learned to scrummage and push the sled around for hours on end. But yeah, he was a big influence and still is.
Well, the Argentine scrum is, always the best in the world. And I don't know why anyone can't beat them, but they can't. And, they just get it. And so that's it. So that, you've had so many great contributions to the game from that perspective. And as you mentioned, there is no team, there is no player, there is no club that survives without this. Any setbacks or things that you sit there and go, gosh, if we'd only done it this way. I mean, not that 2020, hindsight is 2020, but anything that you wish you could have done better. And
Well, I think in my playing days, it was, and I watch today's athletes, it's we thought it was, I don't know if it was ego or just expectation, but we played through injury and we didn't stop to take care of things. And so, things that could have been taken care of and, fixed along the way so that you didn't have later injuries or that you could play at a higher level. Like we always concussed or broken or whatever, you always felt like drag me back out there and keep playing. So from that perspective, player management and health is, advancement today is pretty important. And so, especially because we start playing at a younger age and go longer in our careers, I think that's important. The other thing is more sustained coaching and formal coaching rather than player coaches and friend of a friend coaching. I think at the lower levels, that's still a problem.
Yeah.
So I think that's still something we should all be striving for to, not that you can't have volunteer coaches and parents and friends and whatever, but to build what the U.S. needs as a platform of strong players and pipeline. And not everyone wants to be an Eagle, but I think it's important to have professional type coaches with that kind of behavior and surrounding people about, again, modeling what you expect and what you want. And so having coaches and referees and administrators that behave in a way that show young people and professional athletes how it should look like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, again, 1% play for the national team. It's the 99%. Let's help everybody else there do exactly what you're talking about, because then the game is better.
Right.
You play longer, you pass it on to your kids and their kids and everything else that happens. I think people get out of the sport of rugby because they didn't know what they were doing, and they played one practice and got
Yeah.
smashed, and they said, not for me. But
Right.
yeah, with proper coaching and health and taking care of your body, that careers last longer, so that they can be, club players, which is again the 99%,
Right.
for the rest of their life. I love that answer. You had mentioned better coaching, and um, I'm just going to say the name, and I'm going to let you talk. Kathy Flores, her influence, her legacy. What does she mean to you?
Well, Kathy was a personal friend,
Yeah,
but just watching her excellence as a coach, and as I said, she figured out how to get excellence out of whatever player she had, and as a South All Star, because she was from the South and played at FSU, she'd come down and do clinics for the South, and so I had the few times of being coached by Kathy, and she was just amazing that she could stand in a circle while everyone else is yapping, and she'd just stand there quietly, and then you could hear a pin drop. But even playing at a above average level at ITTs, you didn't want to disappoint. You wanted to perform, and even in our kind of ragtag bunch, she got the best out of us. But whatever she did, wherever she went, it was just excellence, and yeah, it was a sauce that not many people could emulate. And then
yeah,
she was humble about it. You know,
yeah,
she would come out and play with your dogs, play with your kids, and she was always willing to teach, show other people. And it wasn't like, I'm the great Kathy Flores. It was like, oh, hey, what you doing? And she
yeah,
would tell you whatever. And even after someone told you in the scrum or whatever, it's like, did you understand what they were doing to you after the game? And she'd show you the tricks. We don't have those tricks so much anymore, but I'm always willing to share and teach, right? So, we want to beat our opposites. We want to beat our opponents. We want to beat our mates when we see them across the line. But then you have to go teach, and you have to go share, and you have to pull somebody with you. And so I think Kathy did that better than anybody I know in the game as a coach.
yeah.
You know?
And you will always be tied together with Kathy at the 2021 Women's World Cup.
Yeah, yeah.
Tell,
That
tell us
that that
about
was
that.
an honor. That was an honor. So Kathy was
Yeah,
posthumously, if I say that word right,
you did.
inducted into the World Rugby Hall of Fame. And so a couple things, when Kathy knew she was, losing her battle with cancer,
Right.
we were very close with her, but she gave all of her stuff and all of her materials and memorabilia to the U.S. Women's Rugby Foundation, and trusted us to, do something good with that. And she said, go, use my stuff and do good things. And we've tried. But so when that time came around, USA Rugby contacted me and said, hey, you guys knew Kathy and you were friends. We'd like someone from the foundation to go accept it. And so I got to go to New Zealand and accept the award on behalf of Kathy's, in Kathy's name. It was a bittersweet moment. Obviously,
Yeah.
she deserved to be there in person, and it's unbelievable that we've lost her to the sport. But being there with the rest of the 91 World Cuppers from England and some of those other ones, Sue Dorrington and some of those folks, I mean, one, they were respectful, grateful. They told Kathy stories, and so they treated me great. So to be rubbing elbows and in the mix with those people in her class, and to be able to accept on our behalf, was emotional, but you know, probably one of the highlights.
Oh, I figured that might be, the highlight so far,
Yeah,
of
yeah,
your
no, it
life. I
was,
mean,
it
she,
was, yeah. And to
I,
hold her cap and her ring and all that was just, I was definitely never Eagle material or international player, but to stand on the field with those folks and get the recognition for Kathy, totally
yeah,
deserved. Yeah, that's
yeah,
the highlight.
yeah. I was honored to call her a friend, and knew her
Yep.
not to your level, but there we go. And as far as you're saying, you were never an eagle level. I'll argue that and say on an admin side, you were certainly the eagle level. And
Okay,
that's
fair
why
enough, fair enough.
that's why we're going to be celebrating you in July, at the Hall of Fame. So you finally hang up your boots. You do the thing that every athlete dreads and says, "I just can't do this anymore."
Right.
So you've carried on obviously in rugby. and then I'm sure brought all those values to your work and have been very, very successful with work. Um, do you know? How can you compare your rugby values and work values? Do you see that cross? Do you see you must bring that same passion to everything you do?
Yeah, I do. I do. I mean, some of the same characteristics that I've talked about as a rugby administrator carry over into my work life. I've been a
Yeah,
manager of people and whatever, but as a leader, I try to lead from the front, modeling the behavior and the work ethic that I want to see. Personal integrity has been a biggie for me, and your credibility is important, but most important is developing people behind you and creating the space for them to learn and fail and develop, but then to mentor people and give them the opportunities to take the next step. So, you can make mistakes, you can fail, but
yeah,
both inside of rugby and outside, I think it's critically important for all of us to, bring people behind us and give them that space. And then, like I said, Kathy could see an average player and get the best out of them. So as a leader, as an administrator, as a boss, you got to see the potential in other people and help them have the courage and the examples to be able to develop those skills. So, um,
yeah. One of
yeah,
my
I think they're interchangeable, really. It's the
yeah,
same work ethic, whether it's rugby, player, admin, or whatever. They cross over, and it's lent me well in my professional life. And really, on a professional side, if I mention rugby on a resume or in a job interview, it opens up, different conversations. And it's like, oh, gee whiz, tell me more. So my last boss was from Scotland and
ah,
rugby guy, and so we still send messages back and forth about Six Nations and this and that. So I'll look them up when I go to the World Cup in
yeah.
September.
No, that'll be fantastic because it's those lifelong friendships that we've all built
Exactly.
throughout our decades and decades and decades. You mentioned the word fail a few times, and one of the great acronyms that I've put to that, and I've heard it's fail is the first attempt in learning.
Ah,
So
I like it. I'll use
yeah,
it.
and I think that's what you've
Yeah.
kind of been saying here, is that you got to keep going and you've got to keep trying, and that's that's what I'm getting from getting to know you better is that you just there's the wall. I will go through that wall. It won't be
Yeah.
the first
Yeah.
time, but I will go through and we'll break down that barrier and we'll have the under 18 and we'll have the under 20 and we'll have the US Women's Foundation and we will have the Kathy Flores Award and all of those check boxes have been checked. And so,
Yep.
it's a lot to do with the Danita Knox of the world. That's why you are a Hall of Famer. It's not, and that I love this. I really truly do because I think people think that it has everything to do with the star player. No, not at all. There are so many people that make the star player and that make the sport great, and you are certainly, obviously, one of the few that are recognized at this level. So
Yeah. No, I
congratulations.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Yep,
Thank you. Thank you. It's humbling
absolutely.
for sure. So,
All right. Hey, I can't wait to see you in July. I just want to
yeah.
remind everybody that that week is going to be great. It's July 17 for the USA Rugby 50th Gala. It's July 18 at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington, D.C. for the Hall of Fame, where we will be honoring Danita Knox, among others. And then on July 19, the men and the women both play a doubleheader against England and Fiji, respectively. Women are preparing for the World Cup. It's going to be very exciting. And the eyes of American rugby and the world rugby will be on that. And so you picked a great week or a great year to be inducted into the Hall
Yeah.
of
No,
Fame. There's
thank
going to be
you.
more
Thank
eyes
you.
on you than most. So
Yes.
thank you again, Danita. We will see you this summer.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much. Again, appreciate the honor. Take care.
Cheers.